When my corporate card died at a coffee counter in Mexico and my boss stopped answering calls, I realized two things at once. I had been abandoned, and someone in the company was desperately hoping I would board the next flight home. I still remember the sound the payment terminal made, not the sharp beep of approval, not even the dull buzz of a declined transaction. This one sounded almost apologetic. The barista glanced at the screen, then at me. Lo siento. For a second, I thought it was a network issue. The cafe sat on a narrow street in Mexico City, where sunlight poured through old stone facades and painted the pavement gold. Outside, scooters buzzed past open-air restaurants. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing guitar. The world looked far too beautiful for bad news. I smiled, pulled out the cardigan, and tapped. Same result. The barista offered the kind of sympathetic smile usually reserved for travelers who discover their passport expired yesterday. I checked my phone. No notifications, no fraud alerts, no warning emails, nothing. Just an unread message from corporate finance sent 11 minutes earlier. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The email was only 3 sentences long. Due to internal authorization changes, your corporate spending privileges have been suspended effective immediately. Please contact your manager for further information. Thank you. That last line felt almost artistic. I stared at the screen while the smell of roasted coffee drifted through the room. Suspended. Not limited. Not reduced. Suspended. The difference mattered. A lot. Because I wasn't on vacation. I was in Mexico negotiating what might become the largest partnership our division had ever signed. And suddenly I was standing there with one backpack, a hotel reservation tied to a disabled corporate account, and absolutely no explanation. I paid for the coffee with my personal card. Then I called my manager. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. The fourth attempt disconnected after a single ring. That was new. A small cold sensation slid down my spine. Not panic. Something quieter. Something more dangerous. The feeling that pieces of a puzzle had already been moved before I arrived at the table. Outside, the city continued moving as if nothing had happened. Street vendors arranged fruit beneath colorful umbrellas. Tourists laughed. Traffic flowed in uneven waves. Yet suddenly every sound seemed slightly distant, as if I were watching the scene through glass. I opened my laptop. No meeting cancellations. No travel updates. No instructions. The negotiations scheduled for that afternoon remained firmly on the calendar. 3 executives from a regional manufacturing group, 2 legal advisors, 1 procurement director. Months of preparation. Months. And apparently nobody at headquarters considered it important enough to explain why they had cut off the person leading it. That was when another message arrived. Not from finance, from a colleague. 3 words: call me. Now. I stepped outside. The afternoon air carried traces of diesel, coffee, and approaching rain. When he answered, he didn't bother with greetings. Where are you? Mexico City. A pause. A strange one. You really stayed? The question hit harder than it should have. Of course I stayed. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he exhaled. You haven't heard. My grip tightened around the phone. Heard what? Cars passed behind me. A siren echoed somewhere downtown. For a moment, I thought the connection had dropped. Then he spoke. There's a restructuring. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it suddenly explained nothing and everything at the same time. Every company has restructurings. They happen every year. Most don't involve abandoning employees in another country. What does that have to do with me? Silence. The kind people use when they're deciding how much truth is safe. Finally, he said, Some people think your deal shouldn't happen. The street noise seemed to fade. Some people? I shouldn't be telling you this. Then why are you? Another pause. Because sometimes pauses reveal more than words. When he finally answered, his voice sounded lower. Because I saw a meeting invite yesterday. A pulse thudded behind my eyes. What meeting? He hesitated, then said something that would replay in my head for days afterward. Let's just say your name was on the agenda, and nobody in that room expected you to stay in Mexico. A gust of wind lifted dust across the sidewalk. Somewhere above, thunder rolled faintly through the clouds. I looked back through the cafe window. My untouched coffee sat alone on the table, steam still rising. Everything appeared normal, yet suddenly nothing was, because somebody had made a decision, a deliberate one, a decision designed around a very specific assumption, that I would leave, that I would give up, that I would quietly disappear before the most important meeting of the trip. My colleague lowered his voice even further. And there's something else. I waited. His next words arrived almost as a whisper. When they realized you hadn't booked a return flight, people started getting nervous. The line went silent. And for the first time that day, I understood that whatever was happening inside the company was much bigger than a disabled credit card, much bigger than a missed explanation. Someone had made a move, and somewhere far away, they were beginning to realize it hadn't worked. The rain arrived 10 minutes later. Not a storm. Not yet. Just a slow curtain of silver drifting between the buildings, softening the edges of the city. I went back inside, sat down, and finally took a sip of the coffee I'd paid for myself. It had gone lukewarm. Funny how quickly things cool when you're busy discovering your career may have become somebody else's strategy game. I opened my laptop again. No new messages, no emergency calls, no explanations. Just the meeting invitation staring back at me. 3 hours away. 3 hours until a room full of people would decide whether months of work meant anything. And somewhere in headquarters, people apparently believed I wouldn't even be there. That realization changed everything. Fear operates differently when uncertainty disappears. A few minutes earlier, I had been confused. Now I was focused. Because if someone expected me to retreat, then showing up became more than a business obligation. It became information, a signal, a fact they couldn't control. I finished my coffee and walked back toward the hotel. The streets glistened beneath the rain. Neon reflections trembled across puddles. The city seemed caught between afternoon and evening, between sunlight and storm. My phone vibrated. Another colleague. This one from legal. Not a close friend. Not someone who called casually. I answered immediately. His voice sounded strained. Tell me you're already on a plane. I almost laughed. Why does everybody keep asking that? No response, just breathing. Then, because that's what people think happened. I stopped walking. What do you mean? A bus rolled past, spraying water onto the curb. His answer came carefully. Too carefully. There was discussion this morning about transferring ownership of the negotiation. The words landed with remarkable precision. Not canceling, not delaying. Transferring. Someone wanted the deal. Someone wanted the credit. And apparently, they had started moving before confirming I was gone. The picture was beginning to emerge, still incomplete, still blurry, but visible enough. Months earlier, when the opportunity first appeared, very few people believed it would go anywhere. The prospect was complicated, international, politically sensitive inside the company, expensive. Most executives preferred safer projects, smaller projects, predictable projects. I had pushed anyway, built relationships, taken flights nobody wanted, sat through endless meetings, missed holidays, missed weekends, missed more dinners than I cared to count. Now the finish line was finally visible, and suddenly, certain people seemed eager to reposition themselves closer to it. The legal counsel lowered his voice. There's something else. That phrase was becoming a theme. What? The CEO isn't involved. I blinked. Not involved in what? In any of this. The rain seemed louder. For several seconds, I said nothing. Because that detail changed the equation more than anything else. If the CEO wasn't directing events, then someone below him was. Someone with enough authority to disable accounts, enough authority to move resources, enough authority to influence narratives, but not enough authority to make the final decision. Interesting. Very interesting. The call ended with no additional answers, only more questions. Yet questions can be useful. Questions tell you where pressure exists, and pressure always leaves fingerprints. Back at the hotel, I discovered my room key no longer worked. For a moment, I simply stared at the blinking red light. Then tried again. Red. Again. Red. The hallway felt suddenly very quiet. A cleaning cart stood abandoned near the elevators. Soft music drifted from somewhere downstairs. I walked to reception. The employee behind the desk looked uncomfortable the instant she saw my name. That was never a good sign. After several awkward keystrokes, she finally looked up. "Sir, there appears to be an issue with payment authorization." Of course there was. I almost admired the consistency. "Has the reservation been canceled?" She checked again. "No." A pause. "Not canceled." Something about her wording caught my attention. Not canceled. Meaning someone had tried, or considered it, or expected it. The distinction mattered. I handed over my personal credit card. The receptionist visibly relaxed. The room remained mine. For now. When the elevator doors closed behind me, I leaned against the wall and stared at my reflection in the polished steel. Tired eyes, wrinkled shirt, backpack over one shoulder. Not exactly the image of a corporate hero. Yet for the first time all day, I smiled. Because desperation creates patterns. And whoever was pulling strings seemed increasingly desperate. Back in my room, darkness had begun spreading across the city. Headlights flowed through the streets below like rivers of light. Thunder echoed between distant buildings. I reviewed every document one more time, every financial projection, every contract revision, every negotiation point. Hours passed. Then, shortly before the meeting, a message appeared from a number I didn't recognize. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence. "Don't walk into that room alone." I stared at the screen, read it twice, 3 times. Outside, lightning flashed beyond the skyline. A few seconds later, thunder followed. The phone remained silent. No explanation arrived. No second message. Nothing. Just that single warning hanging in the darkness, like a door opening somewhere deep inside a house you thought was empty. And in less than an hour, I would have to decide whether to ignore it. If you've ever had a moment when everything seemed to be falling apart, only to realize something much bigger was happening beneath the surface, you're exactly where this story becomes impossible to walk away from. Thank you for being here and experiencing it with me. The message stayed on my screen for nearly a minute. Don't walk into that room alone. No name, no explanation, no context. Just a warning. The kind that instantly creates two possibilities. Either someone is trying to help you, or someone is trying to scare you. The problem is that both possibilities often look exactly the same. I stood by the hotel window watching rain slide down the glass. Below, Mexico City glowed beneath thousands of lights. Traffic moved through the wet streets like streams of molten metal. My reflection floated faintly in the darkened pane. Tired, alert, thinking faster than I had in months. The meeting started in 47 minutes. I checked the number. Unknown. No previous messages. No identifiable information. Nothing. Then my phone rang. The same number. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Silence. Not complete silence. Breathing. Very faint. Then a voice. Female. Calm. Professional. "You received my message." Not a question, a statement. "Yes. You should listen to it." I glanced toward the city. "Why?" Several seconds passed. "Because people are making assumptions tonight." The answer irritated me. Everyone was speaking in riddles. "Then stop speaking like a fortune teller and tell me what's happening." To my surprise, she laughed. A short laugh, not offended, almost impressed. Good, she said. Good what? You still sound like yourself. The comment landed strangely, as if she had expected panic, or surrender, or exhaustion. Instead, she continued, 3 people are attending that meeting for reasons they haven't disclosed. The room seemed smaller. Who are you? Someone who prefers the deal succeeds. That's not an answer. No. The honesty caught me off guard. Outside, lightning illuminated the clouds. For a brief instant, the entire skyline flashed white. Then, darkness returned. The woman lowered her voice. Bring someone from the client team into every private discussion. Why? Another pause, then, because private discussions create private versions of reality. The line disconnected. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation, nothing. I stared at the screen. The call duration showed 1 minute and 28 seconds. Yet somehow it felt longer, much longer. A new question had joined the growing collection. Whoever she was, she knew details about the meeting. Details most employees shouldn't know. And she sounded remarkably unconcerned about being discovered. That bothered me. Confident people are dangerous. Confident, anonymous people are even worse. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the office tower. The building rose above the surrounding district in sharp lines of steel and glass. Rain reflected across the polished entrance. Security greeted me by name. That alone surprised me. Apparently, someone expected me after all. The elevator climbed silently. Floor numbers illuminated one by one. 6, 7, 8, 9. Each level felt like another step deeper into something hidden. When the doors opened, a receptionist looked up from her desk. For half a second, her expression shifted. A flicker. Tiny. Almost invisible. Surprise. Then, professionalism returned. Good evening. Interesting. Another person who apparently didn't expect me. I followed her through a corridor lined with glass walls. Conference rooms glowed with warm light. Executives moved between meetings carrying laptops and coffee cups. Everything looked normal. Corporate normal, which is often the most convincing disguise. The main conference room stood at the end of the hall, large, modern, overlooking the city. The clients had already arrived. So had their legal counsel and the procurement director. When they saw me enter, their reactions were immediate. Relief, not dramatic, not obvious, but unmistakable. The procurement director stood first. You made it. An unusual greeting, not hello, not good evening. You made it. I smiled. Was there doubt? The room grew unexpectedly quiet. For a fraction of a second, several people exchanged glances, tiny glances, the kind that reveal far more than words. Then the meeting began. At first, everything moved normally. Introductions, numbers, forecasts, operational plans, questions, answers, the rhythm of high-level negotiations. Hours of preparation unfolding exactly as intended. And gradually, something interesting happened. The clients became more engaged, more confident, more willing to discuss final terms. The atmosphere shifted, subtly at first, then noticeably. Momentum. Every negotiation has a moment when uncertainty begins collapsing into decision. I could feel that moment approaching. Others could feel it too, which was precisely when the interruptions started. The first executive interrupted a discussion about implementation timelines. The second attempted to reopen financial assumptions already resolved weeks earlier. The third repeatedly redirected conversations toward procedural concerns. None of it was obvious enough to call out, but together it created friction. Tiny breaks applied at critical moments, just enough to slow momentum, just enough to create hesitation. The woman from the phone call flashed through my mind. Private discussions create private versions of reality. Suddenly, I understood. The interruptions weren't random. They were creating opportunities. Opportunities to separate conversations, to fragment understanding, to influence outcomes outside the room. The realization arrived cold and clear, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. A few minutes later, one of the executives leaned toward me. "Could we have a quick private conversation?" There it was. The first attempt. Simple, polite, perfectly reasonable. On the surface. I looked toward the client representatives, then back at him, and remembered every word from the anonymous warning. The executive waited, patient, smiling, certain, as if he already knew what my answer would be. What he didn't know was that somewhere between a disabled corporate card, a nearly canceled hotel room, and a mysterious phone call, the rules of the evening had changed. And for the first time, I realized I might not be the only person walking into this meeting with hidden information. The executive's smile never moved. It stayed perfectly calibrated, professional, relaxed, harmless. The kind of smile that survives boardrooms, budget cuts, and difficult questions. "Just 5 minutes," he said. Around the table, conversations continued. Documents shifted. Coffee cups moved. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls, overlooking the city. Everything looked ordinary, but ordinary can be remarkably deceptive. I glanced toward the client representatives. The procurement director was studying me carefully. Not the executive. Me. Waiting. Watching. As if he sensed there was more behind the request than appeared on the surface. I made my decision. "Let's keep it here." The smile flickered. Only slightly. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. "It's a sensitive matter," the executive replied. "Then everyone affected by it should hear it." Silence spread across the table. Not dramatic silence, corporate silence. The kind filled with calculations. The executive leaned back. His fingers tapped once against a folder, then stopped. For the first time all evening, he looked uncomfortable. A tiny victory, but an important one. Because pressure reveals structure, and structure reveals intent. The procurement director suddenly spoke. "I agree." Every head turned. He folded his hands calmly. "If the matter affects the project, we'd prefer transparency." Another shift, another crack, small, but visible. The executive's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he nodded. Of course. Yet he never explained what the sensitive matter had supposedly been. Not then, not later. The subject simply disappeared, as if the request itself had been the objective. That bothered me more than if he had argued. A failed move often tells you more than a successful one. The meeting continued, and with each passing minute, the atmosphere changed. Momentum returned, questions became sharper, answers became faster. The clients moved from exploration toward commitment. People could feel it. Everyone, including the executives who seemed increasingly uneasy. Near midnight, the legal teams began reviewing final language. Pages moved back and forth across the table. Clauses were adjusted. Numbers were verified. Outside, the storm finally broke. Lightning flashed across the skyline. Thunder rolled through the city. The conference room lights reflected against the rain-streaked glass. For a moment, the entire scene felt cinematic. A room suspended above millions of sleeping people. A deal years in the making balanced on signatures that had not yet happened. And beneath the surface, currents nobody openly acknowledged. Then my phone vibrated. One message. Unknown sender, again. I felt my pulse quicken. The same number, the same person, the woman. The message contained only 6 words. "Check your company email now." I opened it immediately. A new email had arrived 2 minutes earlier. From corporate headquarters. Priority flagged. The subject line made my stomach tighten. Leadership transition. Notice. I opened it. The room around me seemed to fade. Paragraph after paragraph filled the screen. Announcements, organizational changes, reporting structures, executive appointments. Then I saw it. A familiar name. One of the 3 executives sitting in the room, promoted. Effective immediately. The promotion granted authority over the division connected to the deal, authority that would become dramatically more valuable if the agreement closed. I looked up slowly. The executive was speaking to one of the attorneys. Calm, confident, composed. But suddenly his actions over the past 48 hours looked different. Not random, not bureaucratic, personal. The pieces began sliding together. Not all of them. Enough. Enough to see the outline, the disabled card, the communication blackout, the attempted reassignment, the pressure, the delays, the private conversations, the assumption that I would leave. Every piece pointed toward one possibility. Someone had expected to inherit a finished victory. Someone had wanted the final chapter without writing the earlier pages. The realization arrived with surprising clarity, and strangely, it removed my anger. Because anger wastes energy. Understanding creates leverage. Across the table, the procurement director interrupted the discussion. There's one final item. The room quieted. He opened a folder, removed a document, placed it carefully on the table. His legal counsel exchanged a glance with him. A meaningful glance. Prepared. Intentional. Then, the procurement director looked directly at me. Not at the executives, not at the lawyers. At me. Before we proceed, he said, there's something we should clarify. The room became very still. Rain hammered against the windows. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the executives appeared uncertain. And that was unusual. Very unusual. The procurement director slid the document forward. One page, one signature block. One decision waiting to be made. Then, he said a sentence that instantly changed the temperature of the room. We'd like to know who actually led this project. No one answered. Not immediately. Because suddenly the most important negotiation of the night was no longer about the deal. It was about ownership. And judging by the expressions around the table, several people were realizing they might not control the answer. The questions settled over the room like thunder that hadn't yet reached the ground. We'd like to know who actually led this project. No one moved. The city glowed beyond the glass walls. Rain streaked down the windows in silver lines, blurring towers into watercolor shadows. Somewhere far below, traffic lights changed from red to green to red again, indifferent to the battle unfolding 30 floors above. The procurement director waited, patiently, deliberately. The silence itself seemed intentional. One of the executives cleared his throat. Another adjusted his glasses. The newly promoted executive leaned forward first. Leadership is always a team effort. A polished answer. Elegant, safe. Completely useless. The procurement director nodded politely. That's not what I asked. The room tightened. I could almost hear it. The invisible pull of competing interests. The legal counsel from the client side opened a folder. Inside were pages covered with notes, meeting dates, names, timelines, details. Lots of details. A sensation passed through me. Not fear, recognition. Someone had been paying attention far more carefully than we realized. The procurement director continued. Over the last 11 months, we've had 83 formal meetings. He glanced down at the pages. 31 site visits. Another page. Hundreds of emails. Another. Dozens of negotiations. His eyes lifted, and one individual attended nearly all of them. Nobody spoke. The rain seemed louder. The executive beside me shifted in his chair. The newly promoted one attempted a smile. Again, these projects require broad organizational support. The client's legal counsel nodded. Certainly. Then she looked directly at him. But support and leadership are not identical concepts. The smile disappeared. Just for a moment. Just long enough. And suddenly, I understood something important. The clients weren't asking because they were curious. They already knew the answer. They were testing whether the room would admit it. A subtle but critical difference. The procurement director folded his hands. When we evaluate strategic partners, we evaluate trust. His voice remained calm, measured, precise. The company matters. He paused. The people matter more. Across the table, nobody interrupted him now. Nobody wanted to, because everyone sensed the direction of the conversation, and because stopping it would only make the truth more obvious. The legal counsel turned another page. We reviewed correspondence histories. Another page. Travel records. Another. Negotiation drafts. Then she looked at me. Certain patterns became impossible to miss. A strange feeling spread through my chest. Months of work. Months of airports. Months of presentations, revisions, late-night calls, impossible schedules, quiet work, invisible work. The kind nobody notices while it's happening. Only afterward. Only when it suddenly matters. The newly promoted executive finally spoke again. This time, his voice sounded less confident. We should remain focused on the agreement itself. The procurement director smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, knowingly. We are. That answer landed harder than any accusation could have, because it revealed the core issue. The agreement existed because relationships existed. Relationships existed because trust existed, and trust had names attached to it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the client's senior advisors reached into his briefcase. He removed a worn notebook. The cover was bent, the pages covered with handwritten notes. He opened it, flipped through several sections, then stopped. I keep notes after every major meeting. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who rarely needed to raise it. He turned the notebook toward the procurement director. A page filled with dates, names, observations. The advisor tapped a single line. I wrote this 8 months ago. The procurement director read it, then smiled slightly. Would you mind reading it? The advisor nodded. The room listened. Primary relationship lead demonstrates unusual persistence. Solves problems before meetings begin. Likely reason project remains viable. He looked up, then directly at me. I was referring to you. No one spoke. No one could, because facts possess a remarkable quality. They require very little decoration. The executive across from me stared at the table. The newly promoted one looked toward the window. Neither seemed interested in arguing. The clients had already completed their investigation long before tonight. They had simply waited for the right moment to reveal it. The procurement director slid the agreement across the table. The signature page stopped directly in front of him. Then, he looked around the room one final time. I believe we have our answer. The statement wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Reality rarely arrives with theatrical music. Most of the time it arrives quietly. Then, changes everything. The procurement director picked up his pen. Signed. One signature. Years of planning condensed into a few seconds. The legal counsel signed next. Then, another executive. Then, another. The room seemed suspended between disbelief and relief. I watched the signatures accumulate. Page after page. Name after name. Commitment becoming reality. Outside, the storm finally began moving away from the city. The rain softened. The thunder faded. And for the first time in 3 days, the tension inside me loosened. Not completely. Just enough. A phone vibrated somewhere across the table. Then another. Then another. Emails. Notifications. Messages. News traveling faster than anyone could control. The newly promoted executive checked his screen. His expression changed immediately. Not dramatically. Worse. Subtly. The expression of someone realizing a narrative had escaped their grasp. I glanced at my own phone. An internal company alert had just been distributed. The subject line contained only a few words. Major strategic partnership announced. Below it sat an estimated value. $8.5 million. For a moment I simply stared. Not because of the number, because of what appeared beneath it. The announcement included a summary of the project. A list of contributors. and one name highlighted in the opening paragraph: mine. Across the room, nobody said anything. Yet somehow, that silence felt entirely different from the ones earlier that night. Not tense, not uncertain, resolved. The procurement director stood and extended his hand. Congratulations. I shook it. The city lights reflected behind him. The storm clouds were breaking apart. And somewhere thousands of miles away, executives were undoubtedly opening the same announcement, reading the same names, discovering the same outcome. 3 days earlier, I had stood in a cafe with a disabled corporate card, one backpack, and no idea why the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Now the answer seemed obvious. Some people believed removing me from the story would let them rewrite it. What they forgot was simple. The people who matter most are usually the ones paying attention when nobody thinks they're watching. And those people had been watching all along. The deal was done. The truth was visible. And for the first time since arriving in Mexico, there was absolutely nothing left for anyone to take away.